Welcome to Waterford Wine Company's Introduction to Italian Wine. Now I have to say, introduction is a great way when coupled with wine to kill almost all enthusiasm about what we're going to taste. Whenever I've said introduction before, most people have the reaction of, oh, I know enough about Italian wine, or I know enough about wine, I don't want to be introduced to it again. So I dislike the word, but I think in this particular case it fits. One is, this will be the start of a series of lectures on Italian wine that we're going to build into our website and you can choose to click on. The second and more important things is we have a lot to discuss and a lot to taste when we think about Italian wine. I love the idea of presenting to you some of the history, culture, geography of Italian wine, and then also trying to take those concepts and plant them down into the glass in front of you yourself. Trying to harmonize all of those so we can taste them and feel them as a combined whole. The other thing is, well, most people know the world of wine and think about it in terms of Cabernet or Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Merlot. Those grape varieties are actually all French, or if we wanted to extend that, and the French would not agree, they're all international varieties. Where Italy has 2,000 or more grape varieties all its own. And most people haven't explored all of those grape varieties. Now, 2,000 wines is a lot to taste in even a lifetime, let alone one sitting. And so thus, we have to do just a little bit of an introduction to get us in. So my hope here is what we can do is explore the wide world of Italian white wines, take it in a way that makes sense of all of the things I mentioned before, but also try and keep it focused and lead you into the other lectures that we're going to present. Now, for those of you joining us online, I'd like to point out a couple of things. Here at the store, we're going to taste 9 wines today. Actually, we're gonna slip in a 10th one as a bonus round. So we're gonna have 10 wines. You can choose to buy them all and taste them all with us as we go. You can choose to separate. Maybe you only wanna do one flight at a time. Or you can just choose one wine per flight or just one wine while you watch any of these. All of them and the videos are available online at waterfordwine.com, and use the Italy coupon code, just spell out the name of the country, for a 20% discount on all of the wines that are being presented here. Again, you could put them all in your basket or just one, totally up to you. Now, with all that being said, I should have probably introduced myself. My name is Ben and I'm the owner of Waterford Wine and Spirits. But with all that being said, I hate to leave people dry and not actually tasting wine during a wine tasting. So I'd like us all to taste the first wine, and I'd love it, again, those of you joining us virtually, if you tasted and purchased this wine alongside of us, because I think it's gonna set up something very important when we think about Italian wine. So let's go ahead and take a smell and a taste of that first wine. Now, this first wine is made by a very famous family. They are named Vieti, and it's their wine called Perbacco, and it's from the region of the Langhe, and it's 100% of the grape Nebbiolo. Now, my hope in this presentation is to explain all of that vocabulary that I just said to you, but really, I want you to drink, smell, and taste that thing before we start talking about all the other stuff. The reason is, I want you to smell that and think about your other tasting experiences. And I would guess that in this wine, you're having a more flowery and a more savory experience when you smell that wine versus a more fruity experience. Now, Nebbiolo has a famous tag to it, which is that it smells like roses. Whether you smell roses in that glass or not is entirely up to you, but just hold the thought. And compare it to the ideal of what Cabernet often smells like, or Merlot often smells like, blueberries, or dark currants. Now, we do know the difference, I would guess, most of us, between currants or black currants and roses. And I think we can sense that there is a difference there. Now, what I'd like to say is that difference of emphasizing fruity and savory versus flowery, I screwed that up. That difference between emphasizing flowery and savory versus fruity is one of the hallmarks of Italian wine. The other thing I'd like you to think about is when you take a taste, and again, please do take a taste, think about 3 things as you roll that wine around on your palate. Those 3 things I think you should think about are the acidity of the wine, the tannin of the wine, and the fruit or the body, the voluptuousness of the wine. Now, with this, I'll go through really briefly and then, again, try and locate it in that glass. By acidity, we could mean the vibrancy of the wine, if that's a more friendly word for you to hear rather than just acid. I'm not trying to sell you vinegar. But the acidity, how acidic is the wine? I think most people know that, and if you have trouble with it and thinking about drinking vinegar, instead think about drinking lemonade. Lemonade has a lot of acidity to it. Tannin may be a bit harder. Tannin is the compound that dries out your mouth. It's common in red wines, many red wines, and it's also common in a couple of other things. 2 major ones that everyone knows are spinach and black tea. If you've ever had a spinach salad and your mouth feels kind of dried out afterwards, that's actually the effect of tannins. Red grapes carry tannin, some white, but mostly red grapes carry tannin. So again, something to think about. The fruit, the body of the wine. I think here what we could say is it's the richness, and I think most people would understand that. Very commonly used word for all consumers, I think, of wine is smooth. How smooth is the wine? Another way I could say that I'd like you to think about this is how big does that wine feel? To have that, I would give you the analogy of whole milk or even cream versus skim milk. Of course, they're kind of the same substance and they hold kind of the same flavors, yet one is far richer than the other. And again, I think we all know that experience. Now, what I'd posit to you about Italian wine is something very interesting when you are tasting, feeling this on your palate, and maybe in fact it's quite hard for people to get into Italian wine because of what they're feeling. What I would say here is that Italian wine, particularly Italian red wine, tends to be fairly high in acidity. It also tends to be fairly high in tannin, but then in terms of the body or the fruit character, it tends to be fairly low in fruit character. Now, one of my seminal wines that caused me to catch the wine bug was American Zinfandel. If you think about most American Zinfandels, they are actually the opposite. I'll switch colors. They are tending to be low in acidity, low in tannin, and very high in fruit character. I think for most Americans, they're like me. They start in an area like Zinfandel or start in an area of domestic production like California and fall in love with that style of wine. Then, again like me, when they first come to Italian wine, this is really hard to grasp. They're wines that are extremely acidic, extremely drying, and yet don't seem to reward with fruit character. Now, I'm saying that all as if it's a negative, and I don't mean it to be. I mean it to be our introduction to Italian wine, because this is, I think, the way Italian wines are supposed to be, and I think they're wonderful because of it. Now, if you have a hard time with these flavors, again, what I'd hope for you to hold on to is this was not an accident. This is how they're supposed to be, and I love enjoying the diversity of the wine world. The other thing I would say is almost always, and in fact, I hate to say this, but 100% of the time when I've been tasting with Italians or in Italy, they're eating alongside the food. This gives you some of the classic pairings that everyone knows and often says like a pizza night wine, or some of the Italian famous dishes of ossobuco or eggplant parmesan that have their red wine or white wine, Italian wine partners that go along with it. So try enjoying Italian wine with food, and what I'd tell you is that these characteristics will moderate that and in fact become even more pleasurable, heightening the wine more and heightening the food as well. The final thing I'll tell you, and I definitely believe this and think it's true, is once you start loving wines that are of high acid and high tannin and moderate to low fruit character, really nothing else will give you as much pleasure. And that again brings us back to this first glass of wine. To break it all down for you, this is the grape of Nebbiolo, and it's one that I love, and I think it's absolutely extraordinary. I love the smell of it, and again, it's famous for smelling like roses, whether you believe that or not. It's famous for having extremely high tannins and also very high acidity. And then I'll admit, on the palate, it doesn't carry the weight or the body of Zinfandel. Now, Nebbiolo's main area for growing is Barolo. And in fact, in this bottle, the Vietti family is ultra famous for making Barolos. If you know one saying, or two sayings about Barolo, one is it's the wine of king and the king of wines, and Italians love to tell you that. The other thing, which hints at our second flight, is that it's one of the two big B's of the Italian wine world. I'll explain that later. The wine of kings and the king of wines, though, I think harkens back to this flavor and why this structure. It's the wine of kings because in Barolo there was just one king. And in the past, not present day, but in the long distant medieval past, that one king imposed a tax where he got most of the Barolo that was being made. It was also given as gifts around to other kings to, liquidize, to get them a little bit softened up for negotiations. But the king of wines, why the king of wines? Well, Nebbiolo and Barolo are thought to be some of the longest aging wines that are made bar none in any country with any grape variety. The reason they can age so long is because they have extremely high tannin and extremely high acidity. I have actually been lucky enough myself to taste Barolos that are 60 and 68 years old and found them just astonishingly beautiful. Now, I realize keeping wines that long takes an enormous effort for you or a wine retailer, but if you get a chance, Barolo is amazing as it ages. Here, again, I would point to you that it's this characteristic that allows it to do that. So again, let's finish up this glass and just go through the labels a little bit and talk about a little bit of that promised legal structure of Italian wine. And then I'm going to immediately drop all talk of legalese, because Italians really invent wine laws to generally disobey them. And in fact, they invent all their laws to generally disobey them. If you're looking at a wine label, an Italian wine label, you're going to notice a couple of things, and a couple of important things. Most of them, not all, again, it goes back to my previous comment, most of them will list a location instead of a grape variety. In this case, this location is Langhe. If they list a grape variety, it has to be 100% of the grape variety, and in this case, it's 100% Nebbiolo. Now, why did I show you Vietti's Langhe Nebbiolo instead of a Vietti Barolo? Well, there's an interesting thing there. The main reason is I wanted to show you something accessible and something that I think is amazing to drink now. And that, in fact, is the whole point that Luca Corrado, the current scion of the Vietti family, makes this wine. This wine is called Perbacco. He wants it to be the opener for you to engage with his long-standing family in the grape Nebbiolo and engage with their family of how they're making wines, bringing you pleasure, but also pleasure that can be had on a Tuesday or at least on a Friday night. In comparison, Luca Corrado does make, and Vietti is the name that would be on the label. His mom was a Vietti, his father was the Corrado. He does make lots of single vineyard Barolos, and they're all made out of Nebbiolo. And we do sell them, you'll find them on the website. But they're about $150 a bottle. The Wine of Kings is prized on a kingly budget. But again, with this one, he wanted something to open and introduce it to you. And you can see it's far cheaper. Now, the other thing to note on this one, and I feel the need to mention it, is it's got a proprietary name. I said it before, it's Perbacco. I'm not sure why Luca Corrado chose the name Perbacco, but I do know it's proprietary, meaning it's not a legal name, it's not a legal designation. It's a trademark, but it's a trademark of the Vietti family, just naming that wine. Now, in most regions of the world, I wouldn't bother to explain that to you, but when we get to the second flight, that kind of separate name or proprietary name becomes important as certain producers choose to opt out of the legal structure of Italian wine. Now, the final thing I'll point out here on this one, and also the one coming, is that you're going to get a designation. And this designation is going to come in two forms, more than that, but we'll stick with two. One is the DOC, which I'll slaughter this in Italian is the Denominazione Originale Controllata. And you'll be amazed because your Italian friends just laughed at me because that in no way is the correct pronunciation. But what I can tell you is it's supposed to be a guarantee of origin and a guarantee of quality. Now, when I've talked to Italian producers, they think it's really important, and many of them will know the date, the exact date of when their geographic region got its DOC. And really to the sense that it's pride and joy, meaning that we're acknowledged by at least the Italian government, if not the world, that we're an important place. The DOC, again, is a guarantee of quality, and it's a guarantee of that quality in a geographic region with certain grapes. Meaning that here, you're guaranteed this is Nebbiolo, and you're guaranteed it comes from the area of Langhe. Becomes more important when we look at bottles of Barolo or bottles of Barbaresco, because those are denominated geographic regions. Now, there is a DOCG, which you can think of as the upgrade of the DOC. Now, I'm going to drop the discussion of DOC and DOCG, and instead, throughout the rest of this, I'm going to talk about the places and say things like Barbaresco and probably one you recognize, Chianti. I think it's important to note that many of those places are indeed DOCs or DOCGs. The reason I don't associate them is because it's a lot to learn and I'd rather drink more. And the other reason is that, again, Italians have often chosen to opt out of their own DOC. Kind of a contradiction to what I just said of many of them feeling prized that they were in a DOC or DOCG. So it's a little bit, I don't want to say wishy-washy, but back and forth on what they are. Okay, that's our introduction to the label, to the style of Italian wine, and of course to the grape Nebbiolo, and the wonderful and noble house of Vieti in Barolo. Now, I can't leave well enough alone, and like I said, I love the Nebbiolo grape, so I wanted to introduce you to another Nebbiolo-based wine, and that wine comes from the region of Barbaresco, and is from the producer called Produttore del Barbaresco. Here, I want to give you a rich sense, hopefully, of the wine and the winery, and also what it means, because I think it's really important for understanding Italian wine. Now, if Barolo is the king of wines, Barbaresco often gets called the queen of wines, or the queen to Barolo's king. Now, whether you like the slightly misogynistic language going on there, I actually have heard that a lot from Italians. Whether you prize Barbaresco more than Barolo and therefore would like to reverse that, completely up to you. I give you the phrase though because once we draw a map, we'll get down to Barolo is in Alba and fairly close to Barbaresco, but Barbaresco is just a bit further north and a cooler climate. So tend to make wines that are not as fruity as Barolo, if you consider it fruity, a little bit lighter and more elegant. And here, I think that's so true, and I think this is a producer who absolutely is exceptional in the Barbaresco zone. And I would also have to point out that this bottle and some of their other bottlings are, for what you're getting in the glass, so extremely well priced for you that I would love to have you introduce yourself to Nebbiolo with these two, because I think you're getting a grand statement about Italian wine, and you're getting it at such a wonderful price. So again, 100% of the grape Nebbiolo, and here you get the Barbaresco designation because it's 100% from Barbaresco. A couple of things to explore. If you want, and you'll see it on the website, Produttore del Barbaresco, that's the name of the producer, and we'll talk a minute about why they took the town's name, also makes single vineyard wines. Now, I've heard in Barolo and Barbaresco the word cru, C-R-U, used a lot to describe single vineyard Barbaresco and Barolo. I think the idea there is that the wines taste like the place that they're from, and certain single vineyards make powerful expressions of their own self. And I happen to agree with that. I've had the chance to taste through the entire 9-vineyard lineup of Produttori del Barbaresco, and while they're all 100% Nebbiolo, so share a common heritage, they all taste different from one another. If you get a chance, please go ahead and do that, but you'll see it in both Barolo and in Barbaresco on their labels. This is not going to be the case throughout all of Italy. Now, I can't guarantee you this for sure, but many producers that I've talked to in Barolo and Barbaresco choose to reflect on Burgundy as their example of how to structure their area. Also, the Wine of Kings, with the king pulling in the wine and having a bunch of it to himself, those two histories are very different than what we're going to see in Chianti. But keep that word cru in your head and in your mind. Now, Produttori del Barbaresco, why this name? Well, Barbaresco, of course, is the region, and Produttori del Barbaresco is the winery. It is actually an association of families that make this. Now, there's a good reason for that, and it was a reason that was established almost 150 years ago by the Catholic priest who was in Barbaresco at the time. What he saw at the time was that producers in Barbaresco were so small that they couldn't afford their own winemaking equipment, and really couldn't even afford their own money to send someone off to school to learn about winemaking, or one family member to learn about winemaking. Therefore, they were continually being farmers and selling their fruit off to someone who would then make it for them. Well, that, of course, is not a bad occupation. It was one that, at his time, was making it really so that they kind of continually lived in poverty. He gathered together a collection of families, and amazingly enough, he got them to commit to making higher quality fruit, and also commit to the monetary sacrifice of building a winery themselves, and also hiring someone to make wine for themselves. Now, some of you may know this word, and the word for this is, of course, cooperative. Now, it's amazing because cooperative is kind of a dirty word in the world of wine. But here is the cooperative that proves the exception to the rule and continues on to this day. Now, production across that over a century has not been continuous, but since World War II, the collection of families that have made Produttori Barbaresco are regarded as the world's top collective, or at least one of the top collectives. And in this bottle, I think you see it. Now, I say that all to you because I think it's fascinating and kind of underpins some of the cultural issues of what goes on in Italy as a whole, but also in Barbaresco, and links us to some of the history of the region, which is so fun to explore. Now, I've got a lot more to say about Barolo and Barbaresco and some of its white wines, but I'm going to leave us there for now as I'm trying to get through all of the wines we're going to present in a fashion that you could enjoy maybe in one night or a series of nights, and I'll leave the rest for another lecture at another time. Here, I want to end this flight with a wine from Yerman, and it's Yerman Pinot Grigio. Now, I have a funny introduction to this wine that is kind of insulting to the wine itself, but I think also gives you an idea of why this wine, or I hope will give you an idea of why this wine is so important and why you need to try it. In my distant background past, I actually worked as a cook, and I had to take, as part of my cooking degree, a series of classes on restaurant management. And as part of that series of classes, they gave us a bare bones description of wine and how to work and sell wine. It was very minimal, and you'll hear how minimal in a second. What I was told about Italian white wine is really that there's only one thing you need to know. And that thing you need to know is you only have to learn the word Pinot Grigio. You're going to buy Pinot Grigio for $1 a bottle. You're going to sell it for $5 a glass. And that's how your Italian restaurant is going to make all its money. And that's the end of it. Now, I think that points us out to a couple of things. One thing is, of course, restaurant culture in the US has changed. Another thing though, and this is why I think this wine is important, is Italian white wine has changed. Now that comment is fairly old, but I think the association still is somewhat there of that there's this vast ocean of cheap, rather poor quality, you might even say vapid Italian white wine out there. And when I talk to, say, lovers of white Burgundy in France or domestic Chardonnay from California, they often won't even think of Italian white wine as something more than merely you would reduce a sauce with and maybe drink at the side of a pool, and that's it. Well, times have changed, and times really started changing in the 1970s, and I'd like to say that this producer is a major spearhead to that change. Now, the producer is Yermann. Silvio Yermann was the son who brought the winery up to its current fame. He has passed it on to his son and his daughter, who are making the wines now. But in the 1970s, Silvio Yermann had a thought. He had gone to school for enology. He then graduated and went around staging, volunteering or doing contract work at other wineries as a student to gain experience. He went around the world gaining that experience. And what he came back to, when he came back to his family farm in Friuli, was the thought of, why are we renowned for making cheap wine? Why are we renowned for making poor, vapid wine? Why are we shooting as Italians for the lowest, bottomest part of the barrel? We have a winemaking tradition that spans 3,000 years. We have 2,000 different grape varieties all our own. Why aren't we regarded at the top of the wine world? Now, he hasn't said that to me, so I may be daydreaming, but I think if you go on his website or talk to members of his family, I would hope that I mean that in a positive light, because he started a revolution in Italian white wine. And the revolution was to upgrade it, make it something substantial, and make it absolutely world-class. Now, he makes a lot of wines, and we do sell them here. They're on our website. This is not his most expensive one, but I purposely chose this one because it's Pinot Grigio. Now, in the US, I think you get two sides of Pinot Grigio, or when I meet with clients, I get two different viewpoints. One viewpoint is Pinot Grigio is terrible and I'm never going to drink it. The other viewpoint is, oh my gosh, I love Pinot Grigio, I drink it every day. Now, whatever side of that you're on, I'd like to point out that Pinot Grigio, just like every other grape, can still come in a variety of quality, but this is one of the best. And again, I would think of compete with any California Chard or any white Burgundy that you wanted to put it up against. Just because it's Pinot Grigio in Italian, I don't think it needs to be thought of as poor quality, and I think this is the family that's made it that way. When you explore this, and again, I hope to tackle this in future lectures, one thing I'd like you to think about is this comes from the northeast corner of Italy, a region called Friuli. Now you can kind of get a sense of that if you think about the geography and this name, Yermann. Now Silvio Yermann sounds Italian, but Silvio sounds Italian, but Yermann sounds rather Germanic. Now that corner of Italy has actually changed hands many times, and it is a blending of different cultures. And of course, one of those cultures or governments was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So part of Friuli, and also very much so the part of Alto Adige close to it, were once very Germanic, hence this name. Now I say that because Friuli to me, climatically and style-wise, tends to make a heavier, fuller-bodied Pinot Grigio. Tends to make a wine of bigger richness and guts that most people are used to thinking about. I have had many wine people say it's a more serious Pinot Grigio. Whether you think that or not, I think the idea that it's fuller and bigger as a Pinot Grigio is there because of style and climate. But if we go to the area I just mentioned, and again, we'll do this in a future lecture, you hit the Alto Adige, or as the Germanic people there would call it, the Südtirol. And there they make ethereal, lighter Pinot Grigios. So a total contrast in them and something wonderful that you can explore. I'll wrap up this flight by just taking a taste of this wine, and we'll plunge you into the next flight and talk about the 2 B's of Italian wine and draw you a map to get you centered on everything we just talked about. Cheers.